This man had a dream: to take an international team across the world from London to New York, overland, through the unknown Siberian deep freeze and across the treacherous Bering Straits. His dream became a reality on this amazing journey, overland to America.
Tried to save it yesterday when the engine stopped. Oh, but let's go! It's great, the car driving to New York. I'm very excited.
And to give it to you, the United Nations here in New York, all the way from London. My name is Richard Creasy. My fascination with adventure started when I was 7, when I drove around the world with my father, crime writer John Creasy, and my mother and my brother. This journey started with a dream to drive all the way from London to New York, something no one's ever done before. So, join me for what turned out to be one of the greatest adventures of modern times. Two days after Christmas, in 1993, we started out from London. I was handed the UN baton, which, touch wood, I'd take to New York with messages in it from leaders of all 10 countries through which we planned to travel. Our first record was broken in the 5 hours it took us to get through the Channel Tunnel. No one had driven from England to France as part of a journey before, but I was fully aware that to make it round the world to New York, a lot of other records would need to be broken by our international team.
5, 6.
Here's another one.
6.
Français, one.
Where do you come from?
Moscow.
Yes.
Moscow.
Moscow. Oh.
Terrific, we got through, I couldn't be more pleased. Past the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and through the Brandenburg Gate, that key symbol of the Cold War until Berlin Wall fell in 1989. We were on our way to Moscow to form an alliance with the West's former enemies.
Congratulations, this is Moscow.
I'd been there 50 times since Gorbachev had come to power, and in so many ways, this was by far the most exciting. I was dying to share Russia with my Overland team.
I think the thing that scares me most about Siberia is some of the ice roads, and the ones that haven't been checked, vehicles can go through the ice, and that would be my largest concern. It's happened in northern Canada where you're driving along, it just breaks underneath you and the whole vehicle sinks, and it's very hard to get out.
If somebody does get trapped in the vehicles, or if the vehicles go down, if we've got any crush injuries, we have provisions to provide basic anaesthesia and pain relief, so that we can extract people from the vehicles.
We have got Victor, who is really a very, very experienced man. And the first time I saw him, I said, "Can you really drive a car?" Victor said, "Well, I can drive a car, I can drive a helicopter, I can drive a submarine as well." I said, "Fine, then no more questions."
Major General Viktor Karputkin was clearly going to be a driving force. But it was Vadim Tumanov, a survivor of Stalin's labour camps, who had first convinced me that crossing Russia in midwinter was possible, provided we worked with the Russian people. This part of Russia, like so many we were to drive through, had been closed to foreigners because here, in the middle of the Ural Mountains, is where the communists built all the army trucks you've ever seen carrying rockets in Red Square military parades. In this small wing of the vast Ural factory, the team saw the 6-wheel drive Ural trucks for the first time. They'd been winterized especially to withstand temperatures of down to minus 70 degrees centigrade. During the coming months, we would travel, work and sleep in these Ural trucks, and they would be our only havens in extreme weather conditions.
It's quite impressive actually. We've been next door. Things are just out of this world. Obviously it's their equipment's a bit outdated to what we're used to, but other than that, they've really got things well organised here.
Oh, thank you. What I'm doing here today is packing all the food away, and we're organising it in specific lots so it goes into trucks where we know we can find it. It's boiling hot inside this warehouse today, but it's going to be 60 below where we're going, so we want to make sure it's easy access. Also that we don't eat too much food too early, because I'd hate to be hungry in Siberia.
Russia's world-famous hospitality swept us from reception to reception as we journeyed across the largest landmass in the world. But this one, put on by workers at the Ural factory, was the most lavish.
2 weeks ago, we left London. 2 minutes ago, we left the inside of the Ural factory.
И 2 минуты тому назад вы покинули стены вашего завода.
I'd like to say that I know that your being here will give us the spirit to go from Europe into Asia properly.
As we left the factory, it was cheering to see so many of the workers give such a colourful send-off to our enlarged team, now over 40 strong. Well, looking back, the kind of first part of week 3 was just driving, so we just were plodding along endless roads with quite a lot of snow, with the team getting pretty bored. And it was just one of those times when you had nothing to do but sleep and wonder why on earth it was an expedition. It didn't feel like one, it felt just more like a big, long drive.
A bit tired. A lot of us have got colds and flu. I'm a bit worried about people being tired all the time. We're going to need more free time, I think. There's too much driving through the day and then reception in the evening. We've got 15 minutes to get in and then get out again. I think it's getting a few people, well, it's getting a lot of people down, and it's going to get worse when it gets colder. I don't know, we just have to pull together, I think.
And then every now and again, this was kind of hit by quite extraordinary little sessions. I had to keep on making speeches in towns to people who were expecting us to come past, because we'd done that a lot. And there was an amazing town of Omsk, which we were only in for a very short time. But I had these huge memories of it, because we got to the town centre, all the cars lined up, I thought rather efficiently, because we were going to be filmed by the local Omsk news. And suddenly I find, as I start speaking, that my voice is ricocheting all over the place. It turns out that every single lamppost in Omsk has a loudspeaker.
Okay. One needs to be aware of all these speakers are going around 1,200,000 throughout the whole city. This is what Valery is telling me.
It's make you a little nervous.
Does it make you nervous? It's true. Fine. Excellent.
And I was talking to every single person in Omsk about the journey. It was one of those tiny things which kind of completely change your attitude towards this long, dreary drive.
Members on our team who come from Britain, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and of course Russia. All of us are working together as we drive across the world, right across Siberia, and across that very small but very difficult section of water, the Bering Strait, which has for so long divided the two great continents of the world.
It was interesting too, because the team kept on hearing the same speech, and it was getting about this time they were saying, can you please try and say something different, because we hear the same stuff all the time. So I was trying to do a slightly different speech with each different version.
Yesterday the driving was very hard, because everywhere you looked it was white. You couldn't decipher between the horizon and between what was ground. The only thing that sort of looked remarkably familiar was the Maverick in front of you, or the car in front of you. And then there was a bit of a wind blowing, so the snow was blowing all over the ground, which was quite hard to travel in. But I mean, it's going to get a lot worse than that, so we've got to just get used to it, really.
And then we hit Novosibirsk. And in a way that was a really extraordinarily important point for me, because that's where our Ford sponsors left. The cars were, in my view, officially handed over. They were ours and no one else looking at them. And there was a very big meeting, I remember, on the first morning in Novosibirsk, where some of the team were very worried that we were going to be kind of led in this military style because of General Karputkin and because Peter and others were ex-army. And there was the other side of the bunch who wanted it to be totally democratic and, hey, we all do what we want. And I had to manage these two different areas. So I had this great big meeting to try and explain where we're at. And although everyone was there, I was talking basically to two people. One was to General Viktor Karputkin and one was to everybody else.
Is that we have to keep on schedule. And we've had it very easy up till now. We're in danger of going behind schedule and not making it.
And then we left Novosibirsk, we left New Siberia. And to put into perspective, Novosibirsk had 2 million people in it, so it's a big city. And then the crash.
We were riding, Marielle and I, in the Euro truck behind this green one, and all you could see was 2 trucks sideways across the road. It happened instantly. That one was across, this one hit the other side. It ripped, it looks like the bottom of it off, and there's a whole bunch of oil on the ground. They think it's probably going to take about 9 hours to fix it, and the whole one side of it is crunched in. I couldn't believe how fast it happened.
And the truck which was hurt was the workshop truck. We had a complete workshop on the whole way, and that had to be sent back.
The crash was a pity because it was the Russians put some of the blame on to Jenny, who was driving in front of the car, which had to brake and therefore crashed into a bridge, they said, to avoid hitting Jenny. And it allowed the Russians to vent their determination that women shouldn't be on projects like this.
They were trying to blame me for the accident. And that's just pathetic because, like, you can never blame the car in front. I mean, their braking distance obviously just wasn't enough. What's going to happen when we're on ice roads and they drive too close and we all have an accident in the middle of nowhere?
And we were right slap bang into the one thing I didn't want, and the whole thing was seized by Viktor Karputkin and a whole bunch of others in a slightly, well, very chauvinist Soviet Union in those days, to say this is proof they can't do it. And that was to overtake a lot of what happened to me for the next week as I was battling with this, with people saying, you've got to send the women back. They should have gone back with the journalists from Novosibirsk. And that was a perpetual problem that kept on happening all the time. But it was a huge, huge battle. And not just between me and Viktor Karputkin, which would have been slightly easier, although he was a general, but all the support team felt the same because they were brought up and bred in a very, very chauvinist Soviet Union.
We've got the best day of the trip so far. The sun's out, it's a little bit cold, but it's incredible. Boys are playing football, it's perfect. I think we're going to see a lot of this in Siberia because there's no precipitation up there, so hopefully the sun will follow us. Makes everybody feel a lot better.
And then eventually, remember we'd just come through Novosibirsk, we were getting to -30, -35, -40, and so with the first tests, we started to see whether we should leave the car engines on all the time. And we left the car engines on going 24 hours around the clock. Well, there's no doubt as I look back at it that the absolute highlight of week 4 was the women again, because it was an increasingly large battle between us or me and the team and the people who were doing all the backup for us all the way across Russia. And they absolutely believed that having women on board would be a disaster, and I absolutely knew that they had to be with us. The only thing we could do, and we did it for the next 5, 6, 7 weeks, was to play it day by day and day by day. And eventually, well, we'll come to solutions later. But it was a pretty big battle.
Here we are today in what's a beautiful part of the world, but this morning was the opposite. This morning was the time when it became clear to me that we could get into quite a big conflict between the Russian spirit and the English-speaking party. There's a very strong feeling in the air that the English people or the Western people don't know what they're doing and don't have any idea of the difficulties they're about to meet. In a way, it's Jenny and Marielle who bring that to a surface. If we can bring along 2 people, 2 women, then we clearly don't know what we're doing. And there was the beginning of what's going to become bigger and bigger pressure for me to send on what they call the weaker members, what they mean is Marielle and Jenny, and maybe some others, away from difficult areas where they can't get themselves in I don't know, in what the Russians would think of as emergencies.
I think the Russians think we're a bit incapable and underestimate the conditions out here. And it's been exacerbated by several factors. The clothing we've got, for example, they don't really much like. I think it's sort of hunting, shooting, fishing clothing. And so when a foreign expedition with ladies in it comes along and says that they can do it their way, they don't much like it.
We were now hitting the ice roads. We were having to go from Upscaled up to Merny, and this is along a river area. We were driving on the rivers for the very first time. And this house, it looks idyllic. It's one of the houses on the road, which we knew we were going to stop at. And there was meat prepared for us and a real meal, quite late. But before we got there, Victor had been driving his car like a tank. Absolutely as hard and fast as he could, because he was having a thoroughly enjoyable tobogganing time. The whole thing completely overheated.
Champagne in Siberia.
A drink to the house. Thank you very much. Good to see you.
Outside, the mechanics were feverishly trying to get it so this car would actually go just a little bit further, and they of course had plans for it to go all the way across the Bering Straits. So, as every occasion looks, it was frenetic from their point of view. And in fact, the car never properly recovered. But they got it there and did an extraordinary job. And suddenly, breakfast time in one of the great road stops. We found it incredibly difficult to get started with 30 degrees below zero on the temperature gauges. But it was a remarkable meal. But after a bit, I was kind of looking forward to moving on and getting going. And then suddenly, out of the blue, they decided to give us a gift.
But this is from on behalf of the whole village. Why don't you give it to the association, to Moscow?
Okay.
We have to go. You wouldn't bring my coat, would you, Jeff? Will I just take this? I just take this moose to the doctor.
And so Peter and I walked out. The rest of the team was burning to go too. So this extraordinary kind of feeling of the rest of the team as this moose's head came with us. Never forget it.
I'm slightly staggered. I'm absolutely nonplussed. I have never been given a moose before. I don't know how to say no. I don't know what to do with it. I know the Euro drivers are saying they don't want it on their truck, and we're stuck with a moose. And this is meant to be for the environment. I'm completely stunned. Okay.
So as we were driving up the ice road, with vapour coming out everywhere, pretty slowly the trucks had a lot of stuff in it. Victor continued to drive like he was in charge of the fastest tank in Russia. And of course it stopped again. So for the first time I knew I had to say, Victor, you've got to slow down a bit. And it was me saying, I'm the leader of this lot, not you. So it was quite a tricky conversation, I thought. Anyway, had to be done.
In the trucks together, and we get Euro drivers in the back. But explaining to Victor that if that car breaks, he doesn't have another car until Fairbanks. And that's not what Victor wants. Or I can lead by just giving orders. I can do that very easily. I don't want to. I think the car isn't bad, but it gave us an opportunity of saying to Victor, stop treating the Ford like a tank. And what Victor's doing suddenly is being kilometres away from the convoy. And he's going off like a lone bear. And we had to slow that down. All's going well, but there's tensions, and we had to stop.
And the ice road, well, we were going pretty slowly at the end of the day and drove right through that day until more or less midnight, when, again, out of the blue, suddenly there's this most extraordinary bunch of people waiting for us to welcome us to a new part of Siberia. And we had this terrific welcome. I think all of us were just absolutely dumbstruck.
can't believe it. And I've missed a few of these. This is just the faces of the people. It's like you're coming in completely beautiful clothes of the faces of the children. I mean, they can't see many people from the West, and it's just, I'm actually astounded by it.
And then we got to Merney. The reason they had ordinary roads there was because there was a huge diamond mine. Actually, it was found by someone who was there in the summer, many, many, many years ago, who had been down to the great big Kimberley diamond mine in South Africa. And he recognised in a fox's hole an identical trace of bluey-greeny material being brought up by the foxes. And he thought, there's diamonds here. And this is now the second biggest diamond mine in the entire world. This is huge. And we went there to have a look whilst the mechanics were looking at the cars to get a bit of a break. And as we looked down this massive hole, we found ourselves looking down at the fog. And in the wintertime, the fog almost never goes away. It's right down the bottom. So I've been on the top, but never seen the very bottom of the second biggest diamond mine in the world. Quite extraordinary. By now it was getting cold. The roads were fine as we left Merney to go off to Yakutsk, but the temperatures were really dropping. We were now permanently below -40. The cars kept stopping, and if we just stopped on the wayside for a short time, we'd find when you got out, 5 minutes later, you couldn't actually do anything at all with them. There was no way in which they would bounce up and down with the shock absorbers. And they were misfiring all the time. It was very, very, very cold, and of course, no car in the West is ever tested to below -30. And we were below -40, well, now constantly.
It just won't go above 60k. It's really holding back, misfiring, as you can hear. Whether it is fuel, whether it is something to do with extreme cold, I've not yet actually decided to work out. So while we can keep going, slow as it is, I'd much rather like to do that until we get back tonight to find out what's exactly wrong with it. We've been here about 15-20 minutes, so at -50 now. The cars have been here and the dampers have completely frozen solid. So when we drive away, we've got to drive away for at least 10 to 15 kilometres just to slowly wear anything up. Let's drive on, yes?
Yeah, let's go.
Are you going to drive for a while, or shall I just crack on?
Approaching Yakutsk, we're in the absolute heart of the former Soviet Union, and every night we'd go along and I had to give a speech in what felt like an entrenched Soviet area. And I was getting pretty fed up with these, as indeed with the rest of the crew. But we got to this little town called Nyurba, and they put on dinner for us. And suddenly we found that the mayor, a guy called Yuri, was the most astonishing liberal mayor I'd met. And what it became very clear was that he was a descendant of the people that had gone out there from Moscow in the Gulag times. And his understanding and his intellect and his interest in what we were doing, he'd been following us all the way down, was completely different from anyone else I'd seen. And we had the most astonishing long dances right into the night. And actually it must have been a pretty liberal place for a long time, because this is where there was an extraordinary hospital set up by Marsden. And Doc went to have a look at it.
What we're going to do now is we've come to this hospital that was built in the 1890s by an English nurse called Kate Marsden, who basically travelled here on a horse all those years ago to set up a leper colony. I find it incredible that she came here on a horse. It's taken us 4 weeks to drive here. I don't know how long it took her to ride here. So let's go have a look. This chap's got encephalitis. He just it's very weak and lethargic, and he just lays here, can't speak. It's very, very rigid, and lots of them have it. There's not much they can do for them. They just basically care for them. And a lot of these buildings here, the idea for them was originally from Cape Marsden. That's what they try to do. It's incredible, really, when you think where we are. Yeah. But this poor chap's it's not much of a life, really. Most of the people here have chronic infirm diseases, ill health, and they're just basically cared for extremely well. And I'm very, very surprised by the standard to which they're all looked after. It's very warming as well to see that when we're out in the middle of nowhere. It's minus 50 outside. There is some care in the world.
And then we reached the town of Yakutsk, which is the frontier to the wild, wild part of Siberia. I was sitting back in the base talking to Stefan, trying to work out the best route to go in.
We're going into the Institute of Permafrost now, and basically they're learning how to live on a permanently frozen ground. The ground you see underneath us is frozen all year long, and they've been doing some studying. And we're going to go actually down inside the ground to see what they do, see how buildings work with permafrost. It's an 8-month-old mammoth that was found here in Siberia, and this is a replica of it. It's incredible to see. It's been studied from all around the world, and it's wonderful to be down here. It's kind of haunting, 12 meters down. Cold too, but not as cold as it is outside today. Should we go?
Yeah, go.
Upstairs?
Let's go.
And so once you leave Yakutsk, you start to do things which you never do in the West. There was this huge, huge wide river space. And you just drive across it. There's no need for a bridge, because for most of the year it's completely frozen. The boats were frozen into the ice. And these long shots, I mean, all you can see here is river. This is just as we wind ourselves round, and beneath us is gurgling river, until you come out of the bank the other side, into industry. And this was just the beginning of what we were going to see. And the scenery looked beautiful, but the realization was it was all built by people from the gulags, and hundreds of thousands of people died building these roads. And that became terribly clear as we realized the history we were driving through.
In Yakutsk, I was talking to the deputy chairman of the Yakutia Republic, and she was saying to me that she'd love to join us, but she knows this road as the Valley of the Bones. And she said that because this is where millions of people died as they were sent here for no real reason to build this road. And it was built, and all the other roads around it, by people from the gulags. And when you look at it and you drive through, a whole lot of me has been saying, I now know that this road was not built by people who wanted to build trade, but by people who knew they came here to die. And die not in difficult, hard conditions, but in 60 degrees below zero, sent out with no shoes and rags on their backs, and knew when they walked here they wouldn't get back that night. And that's quite a thought.
Just to put that in perspective, we can see that it must have been extremely tough, but that night the temperature fell to 58 degrees below zero. That's remarkably cold. And 50 years before us, people were out there building that road in those temperatures and dying. And suddenly we hit what is known as the coldest place on Earth. And for us that night it was minus 59. And when you get out of the trucks in that temperature, the anoraks that you wear, which are very much like ski jackets, you could hear them crunch tight as the fabric completely changed. And it was pretty extraordinary to be there.
It's actually 58, minus 58 now, which
I think it's pretty cool. We're going to leave in about an hour, have a bit of boil-in-a-bag breakfast, and then head off to a place called Susan, which is about 250 kilometres. And then we've got to make some big decisions about where we go from there.
Incredibly cold.
Does it feel it?
Definitely feels cold.
It does feel cold. It's a good 10 degrees colder than it has been for the last 2-3 days. And minus 40 now seems so warm.
Tropical.
I mean, you take your gloves off for 20 seconds and we're all fighting to get our gloves back on again.
If you got stuck out here for the middle of the night and had to spend the night out here, you would not survive. You'd be dead by morning.
We will, wouldn't you?
Mixed reactions this morning. Unfortunately, during the evening, I was woken up this morning to say that L2 wasn't running. Basically, what had happened was, I don't know whether you've seen, some mornings with the exhaust, it builds a stalactite or a stalagmite up from the ground, and because of the extreme temperatures we had last night, below minus 55, it completely engulfed the end of the exhaust system and stopped the engine by killing the passage of exhaust gas. We couldn't select gear, we couldn't turn the steering wheel. Everything was just completely frozen up solid. Just trying to warm it up again to breathe some life back into it. I just hope that it hasn't done any long-term damage to anything. Picture.
And by this time I was getting into a lot of problems because the cars had done so well up to now that people presumed we could take them on the non-roads. But I was absolutely convinced that we were going to have to send back these saloon cars, the Mondeos, to America. So it was coming to the end of the road. And the decision I was going to move it on was mixed with these beautiful landscapes that we crossed as we were going along the last of the kind of major highways into Suzuman.
It's not an ideal. It is. Everybody comes down to the basic fact that it is an expedition. It is not. It's not something where you've got free time off and having fun. You eat, you drink, you sleep, and you drive. After that, forget it. You don't have them. You don't have those rights. You can't
turn into a robot for 3 months. I mean, you can't suddenly turn into.
And by now the team was becoming very, very, very agitated. They'd been really escorted all the way on their expedition and didn't feel they were on one. And tempers were really starting to get on top of everybody. And so it was really the huge frustration, and I brought together a big 4-hour meeting so that everyone could at least say what they wanted to say without me trying to get involved in it.
No, but you're still saying you want to do the objective your way. We're not under orders.
No, you're not under orders, but we are relying entirely on the Russians, and that is why we are basically baggage up until now. You've got to accept that. You know, we are totally reliant on these people. The amount of organisation and work that goes on ahead, we have no idea.
You're saying there's an expedition that we have orders and we have to follow those orders.
I mean, you're saying with an objective,
but you're saying the objective is all.
It is all.
It's not. We're not talking about the Russians now. We're talking about individuals and how each person feels. If they feel shattered, whether they feel they need half an hour, whether they're not just being a pain and saying, I want to stay in bed, but they need that half hour. Why? If that's what they feel, and they, no, because some of you are driving more or less than others. And why should that person get sick because of you?
We're here for 100 days, and I think that's what the Euro truck drivers should realize. That's what the other people here should realize, that there's a continuation of this entire project, that if we keep going the way we're going, there's huge implications to physical deprivation, sleep, a lot of those things.
It's up to us to put it to them as a group.
The decision that I've had to make now is what cars to take forward and what cars to stay back. I think that almost certainly we'll now be sending both Mondeos down to Magadan. And what I'd like to do is throw it open to any thoughts that people have.
In a sense, we've been travelling almost as 2 convoys, haven't we? I mean, there's been us and the Russians, and I think there's 4 cars now left. And we've got to try and travel as one.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
With any Arctic expedition, anything that lasts for this length of time, the most important thing, like we take care of the vehicles, which I think is being done extraordinarily well, the people need to be refueled. That happens through sleep, happens through food. Those 2 things, I believe, are not being taken care of well enough.
Но дело в том, что у нас таких проблем не существует.
We don't have this problem.
Потому что
because
мы более привычны к таким
we are
трудным
used to these conditions.
Richard's cracking up. I wasn't aware of it until he told me, but he's that far. Because everything, the whole system, we don't understand, we don't see it, and it's a lot bigger than I appreciated. I mean, what I'm saying is mentally, it's getting to him, and we've got a long time to go.
But he's got decisions that we just have no...
I know, dear.
No idea.
It's just things within inside the context of what happens can be altered to help the human element in this thing, and that's why people are having challenging mental situations, because they aren't well rested, they're not fed consistently, and those things can be changed.
Obviously it does no one any good if the chief goes down. I think one of the main problems is, having had this discussion, everyone from your side, you're not that happy with certain aspects. Let's get happy and start working with people properly. That surely will take the pressure off him. But if the column goes smoothly, if we make the miles, if people in the evening are happy faced and there's not too much friction between the Russian side and our side, that will help immensely. I can't see a problem.
One of the big problems on this kind of project is the leader, and one or two people very close to him, knows that decisions have been made 3, 4, 5 days back, but many of the people on it are still resisting those decisions. We were trying to nurse the Mondeos on for the last bit of the tarmac road.
Dead.
And the mechanics were convinced that if they could just do it, maybe I'd let it keep on going, and then the car stopped by itself, so instead of me having to make a decision about a good car, it just wouldn't go any further.
Just doesn't want to know anymore.
And here we are on Semchen, the very end of the tarmac road. And they got the car going again, but in a way, this for Paul, the Ford mechanic, was the worst part of the trip.
Obviously to drive a car from London to New York, overland, would be a great personal and it was a great thing to do. It's an expedition. I mean, you look at people that have done expeditions before, and you admire what they've done, their courage, and the things that they've actually been through. We've got to the stage now where the elements have actually beaten us. There's questions that I physically cannot answer. I've never experienced minus 55 and below. It does things to men and machines that I can't answer.
The reality is, you're about to do what you said you're going to do. You're taking a bunch of Mavericks, and you're going to get them every bit as far as you can. From an expedition point of view, when you first heard of the project, which was you're going to drive from London to Uelen and then from Fairfax down, I think you still will.
And so, before we started, we went to the first of the gulags that we'd really been to, which was the labour camp where Stalin sent all the completely innocent political prisoners. 20 million people died as a result of Stalin trying to get the intellectuals away from him. And people were sent from Moscow to here, in this kind of temperature. It's that astonishing contrast between some of the really beautiful scenery with terrific hills, not much trees because we're pretty far north, and the reality that people were here, literally where I'm standing, knowing that they might only have a day to live. My perception of the gulags was that they would be in the middle of nowhere, like we are now, but I hadn't actually got a perception of what the middle of nowhere is really like until you stand here. And suddenly the words take on a real meaning, because you're absolutely so far away from the places we've been to. We're an hour and a half's drive from the very small town we've just come in from. And these guys walked here and stayed here. And I find it horrifying. You can see the wire, it's just so put down. You can feel the people putting that together. Yeah. Can't you? And there's
just twisting that wire around like that.
There's something in there which is full of loathe for the place. And then we hit quite a shock, because everyone thought that they'd seen difficult roads, but actually we really were on ice roads. And for the very first time, certainly the Ford mechanics realised there was no way, under any circumstances, an ordinary saloon car could get anywhere on these roads. And this was just the very, very first 100 miles of 3,000 kilometres ahead of us. And I had to have a big discussion to say, look, we we must get the strongest people there, and actually, interestingly, I wasn't one of those.
Stage yet. But I know that Paul's concerned, and the Russians are very concerned, that we could actually blow clutches terribly easily. And my feeling is that what I'd like to do now is to make sure that in each car, and we've only got 4, there's at least one, what Paul would call, because he's the guy in charge of the car, strong driver, right? And I'm not going to say at this stage Jenny or Marielle or people who aren't considered to be the strong drivers are the wrong people to drive, but I do think that we shouldn't have Dieter sitting in the back on sections where it's difficult. So what I'd like to do is change it round, if I may, and say to Jeff and all of you, you work it out. If it doesn't seem to work out properly, I'll jump in, but we do need to work out a way in which what are known to be the strong drivers are in a car so they can drive. Okay. Well, I've half driven the car into a deep snow. This is a very good way of saying to them that if I, the expedition leader, won't try and get it out, I don't want them to get it out, because if we do, all we'll do is hurt the clutch. And this is not in any way serious. It will happen all the time as you take a slight dip. But the biggest problem is not going into a ditch, but is how you take it out. Make sure you always get it dragged out, rather than use the engine to get it out, because that's the best way of wearing the clutch that I can think of.
And the cars were finding it every bit as difficult as we, the drivers, were. The miles per gallon had gone down from the normal 15, 20 that a Maverick would do, down to 3 or 4. And as we had to take all our fuel with us for this long, long stretch ahead, Ruud, who was in charge of logistics, was pretty concerned about the fact that we were running through petrol far, far faster than they thought we should be.
Do you think, I mean, is it realistic to turn the Eberspacher car heaters off at night to save some fuel consumption? What do you think?
Not really, because they've been open the last couple of nights.
Obviously, it's of some concern that we get it right. Thanks. Yeah, we've got some worries about fuel consumption at the moment, because, as Paul just said, a litre a kilometre, and that's the cars. We're meeting some very, very tough road conditions already, and the cars are having to work really very hard. We've only got 5,000 litre petrol tank, and I'm worried, seriously.
I actually found the drive extraordinary. It was the beginning of an expedition, whereas before we'd just been moving through a deep freeze of Siberia. And suddenly, out of nowhere, arrives a helicopter. And that was because the local mayor had been aware of my interest in the gulags, and he came down to take us to one which you could only get to by helicopter. And I'll never forget it.
Well, thank you very much for dropping in on us.
Спасибо, что вы на нас обрушились.
Funny, as you look down, the place looks so astonishingly beautiful and so different. But just take your mind back 50, 60 years, when I was born, for crying out loud. And this is where people were shipped from Moscow. 1 week they're in Moscow in their completely centrally heated place, and the next day we're here where they knew they were going to die of cold. And when I say they, most of the people in this camp were women. Housewives, whose husband had been caught with an English newspaper, or listening to BBC World Service.
And to the women who were sent here without hope, deprived of any human feelings, deprived of the warmth, deprived of their families and children, it was a survival. And I only hope that we can be a fraction of them being strong.
And to think that people survived out here and actually lived in the middle of nowhere. And we're faced, I mean, we'll go back and we'll have nice hot food and everything. I mean, these people live for years in this, which is nothing.
I physically cannot believe how they survived. I honestly don't know how they survived, because obviously they wore nothing either. But the thing that actually affects me more than anything else is the total silence. I cannot get over it.
So we left the gulags and we set off on our expedition with our big, thick, heavy clothes. But actually, it was easy to think that we were okay, but we had an extraordinary drive ahead. And I knew that I was now doing what Stefan and so many people said I must not, which was going ahead with all the women on board up the most difficult road that no one else had ever managed to do. The last people who attempted to do this journey was a joint Army, Navy, Air Force team from Russia, and they failed. So that's what I was heading off for. And as I arrived back to the trucks, looking down at them from the helicopter, I was aware that I'd taken a huge risk just to see if we could do something which no one else had done before, and I was learning why they hadn't, because it was pretty tough. As I look back at week 7, it was probably the most enjoyable week of the entire trip. We had a lot to achieve, but we reached somewhere, and we were here at the Arctic Circle, and a bunch of people from Chesky had come out to welcome us.
1,611 miles from the North Pole. Straight that way.
Whew! That's
getting close.
We're getting close.
3 days ago they made a road all the way here, but yesterday the snow wiped it out. So we're on a track made by Urals, and they took 7 hours to get here.
They had a blue ribbon which I was asked to cut, and I still have a piece of that blue ribbon in my passport holder today, because it was one of those memorable times. You don't often drive up the Colomar River and cross the Arctic Circle.
Dion and I have been keeping everyone posted how close we're coming to the Arctic Circle, and Dion, what do you think? Are we here?
I think we're definitely here, yes, although the Russians disagree. They say it's 66.34, we say it's 66.33. We've met halfway exactly, we're 66.33, 500.
So here we are.
We're here.
Welcome to the Arctic Circle.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Lovely.
What I think is so good about coming here is partly crossing it, and partly seeing the genuine, terrific fun that people are having just getting to know the milestone. That's in a way what this journey's been about. It's been a collection of people really enjoying getting further.
So we actually drove across the Arctic Circle. In fact, it's a bit of a cheat. We had to tow them a lot and stop a lot, and on one of those stops I saw on a small hilltop some hunters, and they came down to the cars and had a look, and clearly they'd never ever been in a car which had doors and windows and doorknobs to open them with before. And they were seeing something which they never ever believed they'd see. And they were hunters and fishermen. And in the summer they'd fish, and then they'd put all the fish into a permafreeze. We were driving along snow which was 2-3 feet deep, along the crusty surface which had been frozen. And it was something which the 6-wheel drive Ural trucks could cope with. They had their tyres were pressurised to go up and down as they drove. But we were into towing territory, and for 90% of the time the only way to get the 4-wheel drives was to beat out a track with the huge great army trucks and to pull the 4-wheel drive Ford Mavericks. And this took days and days and days, 3 or 4 days of this non-stop, very slow coverage. We were doing about 25-30 miles a day.
The river is the road very flat. The speed 80
Oh, very good.
No.
No bumps?
No.
Oh, нет, но не отсюда. Еще немного проехать. Let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah. Yes. Time to go.
Please hurry.
We just started conversation, and the amount of English Voloddy's picked up is amazing. He's, you know, like all colours and everything he's learnt, and he was just saying there, laughing, that he's the only English-speaking Russian with a French accent, because Marielle keeps jumping in the green truck with him and teaching him English. It's getting more and more enjoyable. Everyone's sort of mingling as one big team now, so it's no more them and us, so we're having a right good laugh with them.
And after days of being towed through thick, deep snow, suddenly we came to an ice road on a frozen river which was just as smooth as a racetrack, and we darted along. We were coming up to a town called Chersky, and it was probably the most extraordinary occasion of my entire time in this part of the world. And no one could really believe it. And there were great big cracks in the road, but the ice was 3-4 feet deep as we charged along it. No danger, no real fears.
We're on the Kolyma River on our way north to Chersky, well above the Arctic Circle. We're driving along the solid ice. We can travel at 100 kilometers an hour. The ice is probably about 6 to 7 feet thick here. Very smooth and shiny. A lot of cracks running through it. See a big crack over there, and it's glorious compared to what we've been driving through for the last 4 days.
And then eventually we arrived at a place called Chersky, and it reminded me just of a Lowry painting. Lowry was always been one of my favourite artists. He came from north of England, and he always had landscapes with smoke going across them, tiny figures and tiny buildings. And there in front of me, right up here in Siberia, was a Lowry landscape, and that was Chersky. And in Chersky was one of those great highlights of my life. There I was, in the middle of nowhere, reading one of my dad's books. Here I am in the tiny village of Chersky, in a tiny little library, run by 3 librarians, and here's one of Dad's books. And it's an extraordinary feeling. And not even that, but even more bizarre, it turns out to be an Inspector West book. And here we are, page 55, and there's a little passage about me, because I figured in all the Inspector West books as one of Inspector West's children. And when Dad wrote, he would write exactly what was happening at the time to me and my brother Scoop. But it's an extraordinary feeling, and I think that Dad would have been overwhelmed if he'd made this journey all the way from London to here and found 3 people enthusiastically looking at his books and talking about them. The most important thing I learned from Dad was never ever take no for an answer. And on this expedition I've had people tell me it can't be done, or I can't do it, or you haven't got the money, or you won't be able to take it in time. So I've been not accepting no for an answer from the very first day I had the idea. And up this magnificent river, from this Lowry painting of a place called Chersky, which, take the romance away, means it's full of soot. And you can see huge streaks of black soot across the city because there's so many different coal files, to a place called Bilibino. I'd first heard about it about 6 months earlier. And this is a nuclear power station, less than 1,000 kilometres from the American coastline. So we were about to walk into a power station. I was quite keen to find out how like Chernobyl it was in design. It turned out to be completely different from Chernobyl. But there was another extraordinary thing about this place, which I still look back at, was a kind of feeling of disbelief. None of the power workers in this power station had been paid for 6 months, because there was no money to pay them.
Never did I think I'd see 300 uranium rods.
That we're standing on top of the reactors. There's 4 of them out here, and in Canada last fall I went to see the nuclear power station near where I live with my father, and you'd never be allowed in this part of the building. I mean, this is where they put the fuel rods in, and you feel standing here inherently in danger.
to actually stand inside a nuclear reactor, to actually stand on the reactor itself, to see the rods stored at the side. I was petrified about coming here, but the experience of actually being inside a nuclear reactor is just absolutely incredible.
And then back onto the ice roads. And if you look at the mountaintops, you'll see a whole lot of them are kind of sawn off. There's one right there, almost sawn off. And that's because in the summertime, they're digging gold from it. And many of the people who were forced here by the labour camps, when they left, never went back to Moscow. And they've made much of their money from gold mining. All done in this extraordinary remote part of the world. But around them are all the people from Chukotka, the Siberian Yupik. And coming to visit us for the first time were two more people from the UNESCO Youth Reconciliation Team. Mona, who is a Palestinian who'd been in a prisoner of war camp, and Ronnie, who was an Israeli parachutist sergeant. And they both came together to ask this hard-knit, tiny team so that we could say to the world that this UNESCO project and United Nations project really had demonstrated that people of all nationalities could work together. And to introduce them, we took them off to a reindeer party.
Our reindeer man's gone around the front of the herd, and he's coming this way now, and I'm going to go up behind and see if I can grab one of the little darlings.
Yalla! 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 Yalla!
Well done, Peter.
Now, if you look at that smoke, you've got a 50, 60 mile an hour wind behind it. And it was quite a struggle to keep on our feet walking. In fact, I think all of us at one stage in the 2 or 3 days there were just literally swept off our feet. And I was keen to get away to yet another gulag. It sounds like there have been many, but this one, this labour camp, was really a labour camp of death. This is where they sent prisoners, innocent political prisoners, to their death, because this is where they mined uranium.
It's got to be one of the most horrific human places in the world. Civilization would never build a place here. I mean, you'd only build a place here if you wanted to kill people. And each stone was probably dragged up from the bottom of the valley by human hands and feet, and they'd put them up here and they'd contribute a few and then they'd die.
I mean, how can people survive here? You know, I mean, as Jeff said, they literally would have contributed maybe a couple of stones and just died. You know, how can we ever conceive what they went through? I think of the people exiled here by the fearful regime of power, the beauty of the land distorted by the nature of the elements, the struggle to survive highlighted by memories of home, the fear of death not by strike of a hand, but by the harsh components of the land. So many deaths, so many souls, and so much to live for.
And right here is the Arctic Ocean. And it was for the very first time I've ever seen a completely frozen ocean.
It was nice to get going after spending a couple of days basically delayed by weather in Pevek, huge winds there. and we're traveling along an incredibly beautiful road that has cascading mountains and blowing snow today, but that's what it's like here in the Arctic. Big contrasts. Standing on the Arctic Ocean here, looking out straight north from here, about 1,300 miles is the North Pole. You could probably walk there from here. It's mostly ice, a little bit broken water, but looking north there's nothing between us and the North Pole, no land at all. We're standing here on 5 meters of ice that's been pushed in as the storms during winter, as the ice was freezing, piled it up, and there's tons of ice as far as the eye can see, straight down the coastline. It's definitely a place that says how hostile and how vibrant the Arctic is. It looks like a frozen wave as you look down the edge. The ice basically froze where the water last pushed it.
And other teams have got this far to Messerschmitt, where we are now, but no one's got from Messerschmitt the next step. And what we were going to do was to send 2 more of the 4-wheel drive Maverick trucks and one of those trucks, the Ural trucks, back across to Alaska. Into Fairbanks we could do it. So this was really our big last stopover, and if we managed to get from here, we'd have cracked it. So it was relaxation time. Well, relaxation time for the team. I was locked into discussions with the local army, who were going to escort us with their tracked vehicles all the way across to Lavrentia on the border of the coast. But whilst they were playing football, what they did not know was that Moscow had ordered them not to help us because they thought we might fail and they didn't want to be involved with a failure. So we were into a very, very long discussion as to the best way to go from here on.
We're now on the very, very final lap of the Russian leg, and on each of the routes we've been looking at, there's 100 kilometers where this year no one's driven before, and we're in the middle of this fantastic mountain area now, covered in white, no trees around, which gives it a very strange contrast. But if the weather turns on us, what should be a 3-day journey to get to Lavrentia and the Bering Straits, and therefore the end of the Russian challenge and begin the next, could be a 12-day wait where we're trying to get out of the snow here. But we'll go as fast as we can.
So we set off on a middle route, and it was apparent to me that the only way we would do it is to get help, because we needed a tracked vehicle to take us on this kind of territory. You can see that by now the trucks were going incredibly slowly, because if they went faster they would dig themselves into the snow, which by now was feet and feet thick.
About 3 meters snow depth up ahead, so we don't really know how to get around it. And so someone's going to go up ahead with the track vehicle, probably with the GPS system, and try and work out the easiest route to get through. But it's not good news. It's going to get dark soon, and we've got nowhere to go. So. Well, okay. We're going off up the road to the lake to find out a route there, and then come back. So.
This is the kind of thing which could go badly wrong. If they get lost and the snow comes down, we can have a convoy stuck, lickety stuck, so it's all a gamble. But we knew it would be like this, and it is. It's what we always said would happen, and it's happening.
And so for the first time what I'd done is to split the team up into 2, which is something a leader should never do. And then there was a kind of calm, and we got completely lulled by it, because we tried to follow the trucks. We went on driving through the night, and then one of the trucks broke an axle in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And before I knew where I was, the team had split not into 2, but into 3. Put in perspective, we were further away from any other person than people who fly to the moon are from Earth. We were a long way from nowhere.
feeling a bit tenser, and certainly for a few of us, we actually feel like we're getting into something here. So we're trying to get to a lake, which is apparently about 60 kilometres ahead from where we are here. We made 24 kilometres, but had to come back 7 last night because we lost the track. So it's a beautiful day, but it's happening.
But Monasteni found a route. Rupert came back, and that meant if we followed the tracks of this track vehicle, we should find a way through, which was extraordinary. And Rupert had taken a GPS and found us all the way there. And General Victor Karputkin had slept in the back of the track vehicle the entire journey.
We got into the mountains and then we had a whiteout and really couldn't see anything, and so just continued as best we could using just a GPS computer, and got as far as we could until about 4 in the morning, and then we had to stop. The visibility was down to about 1 metre, and then got up in the morning and got to this camp, which is what we're heading for, about 6-7 kilometres from here. But we've had a lot of trouble finding our way down these valleys. They're very narrow, so it was quite a good thing to get there in the end.
And just we found the way through, so the storm hit. And this is a 4-day storm. But it's not just a 4-day storm, because storms bring all sorts of problems with them.
Tried to save it yesterday when the engine stopped. Oh, but I couldn't stop the snow getting inside the engine. And no more an engine. As you can see, if you look inside this vehicle's not too bad. But L9 back there nearly has a foot of snow inside the vehicle in places. It's incredible. Actually destroyed it completely.
And on top of that, Volodya, the driver who I'd been with for most of the journey in truck number 5, suddenly found he had angina. And doc was really needed. And we got to a stage where we felt we'd have to keep on moving forward whatever the weather. So out went the team to see if they could take some rope far enough ahead of the trucks for the trucks to be able to follow. But as always, we'd got the rope in England and it was white, so you couldn't see any of it in the snow time. These little things you get wrong when you're doing the planning. And if one of those people had disappeared, I'd have been in such huge trouble as a leader, letting them go.
We walked out on a bearing of 73 degrees to walk towards the lake. We know the lake's out there. Rupert did a recce yesterday, day before in a tank. We know there's a road out there. We're stuck here in this, well, it's a blizzard. Although Jeff says it's a pretty tame blizzard, I'm not so sure. We know there's a road out there, and luckily we've just found it. We just staked a route out about 500 metres that way. Luckily we found it, so we should be able to get moving pretty soon and find the road to Laverentia.
We'd lost all contact with the outside world. The satellite fax we had wouldn't work. The radios, of course, were well out of range. And we had to move on. And we did it because we had one quite extraordinary driver on the journey called Nikolai.
The Mavericks and went back again to the lake, but we were left behind. No one in our camp wanted to move. They were too worried. And eventually Connie comes back, bursts through the door and goes, "We're off." And everyone goes off suddenly because they realise it's possible. But no one wanted to go out except him. So we're very much indebted to him for getting us moving. I don't think any of us had the balls to do it. So quiet as he might look, he's actually earned the title of Tundra Man, most importantly.
And so Tundra Man was the person who really did lead us through it. Without him, we wouldn't have got through. And I have not one shadow of doubt, and nor does anybody else. It was him who did it. And you can see how the wheels just turn an inch or two at a time as he was driving it, so they wouldn't go too far in. And this is why we eventually managed to do less than 11 miles a day.
That truck's up to its axles and beyond in snow, and he's travelled exactly the same route as what Nikolai has travelled. And just because of his not been sympathetic towards the vehicle and understanding the snow conditions, he just buried him.
And it really is very bad darts at the moment to have that. I mean, accidents can happen to anyone, but we just don't need it right now. We really don't.
It's about 7:30 in the morning. We've been driving through the night in conditions which, well, even the tuk-tuk, the people who live out here, wouldn't drive in. We are 2 kilometres from cracking it. I'm pretty confident we will. A few people have had mild frostbite, but well, I think we've succeeded in that first bit. But it's 2 days to go. It's 1 night more drive. So let's keep touching wood. But it's been a good 2 days. Very, very different, and very, very much the kind of expedition feel that people have been saying we might have, but we actually believe we wouldn't. And we've got it yesterday.
And then suddenly, it was fine. There was no storm, the wind had died down, and we were driving on very, very easy roads. One of the reasons it was so easy, because the wind had swept so much of the snow away. But from there, we drove more or less without trouble, all the way to Laurentian. That meant that we had done something that no one ever achieved before. We arrived in the very, very, very furthest town that you can get from Moscow, and the closest you can get to America and Alaska. So we were on the Bering Straits. And it was an extraordinary, elated feeling.
We made it!
Anybody know the date today? 7th of March. The Octals is about to land in 20 minutes time, but first I think that Richard has a little announcement to make in the canteen.
So that what we'll do is have the minimum crew on the Octals. Those people on the outcross will be Victor, will be Jeff, and will be me. Everyone else is going on the Hercules out to Nome, and I'm sorry about that information. At another time, I'll explain what the 5 hours tonight led me to. But at the end of the day, I know that if things go wrong, the one thing I want more than anything else, from my point of view, is as few people as possible to worry about. Okay. So that's what we'll do. And I can't say more than that. I'm just sorry that it's worked out this way.
I don't know why I'm here. What was the point of asking me to come on an expedition if I'm of no use? But people that are going need encouragement, so I'll have to, before I go, I think about half an hour or something, I will give them my best. Godspeed and all that.
I don't know what to say. I'm really, really disappointed. It's just like this is the end of the expedition now. That was going to be a highlight of the whole thing, and I suppose we understand some of the reasons, but it's not a pleasant sight to actually have to leave it now. We'll see you in Fairbanks. See you soon.
We were there and saw the Arcos for the first time, this vehicle which was a prototype of a lifeboat that had been built for the Canadian Arctic icebreakers and commissioned by the Canadian Coast Guard.
We can be ready to go in the next half hour, 40 minutes.
We really should.
We'll just get going. It's ready for us. Thank you.
And the first thing it did as it arrived in this cold, cold area was break a bearing. We were suddenly, instead of charging across the Bering Straits to be the first, we found that this 10-year-old vehicle was actually, well, it gave up in its very, very first half hour in Russia. The Russians were extraordinary. They got their workshops. We had to get a spare part flown in from America, but by and large they were able to do a lot of the stuff in their workshop. So the bearing was replaced, and this huge, great track, which was over a ton in itself had to be put back in the, thank goodness, in the kind of nice warmth of a repair shop. And they've never actually done it before without the real tools, but they got it back on. And we were off. And I must admit, I thought it would be a day and would have done something which no one's ever done before. Climbed, if you like, to the top of Everest and been the very first to do it. I suppose I'd lulled myself into thinking the only way to get across this journey and to make it work was to be optimistic and presume things would go well. Very slow, but very sure, very definite, and off it went. And the Russian team waved goodbye, and I thought I'd be a complete hero. And for the first half day, it was just as I thought it might be. It was effortless, everything was going, the engines were ticking. I was pretty tired, but we thought we cracked it.
Well, for me, I find that time is flying along. I'm surprised that we're 5 hours in. We're going about 2-3 kilometers an hour. We stopped a couple of times, 3 or 4 times, and I'd have thought I'd be pretty impatient by now, but I'm not. And it's one of those times on the trip that I'm really enjoying just every single minute of the journey, and will do, I think, right the way until we, all being well, get across the Bering Strait. And the news about the ice which has just come in from the last helicopter recce is good. So it's far too early to say I'm feeling confident, but I'm certainly feeling that we've got as good a chance we've ever had. It was pretty gusty out there, and the wind is very, very variable. And also the ice is very different from the ice that Bruce had seen before. So we're in for some surprises, I've got no doubt.
Arc toasted tower, arc toasted tower. We just dropped a track off the back left side, and we were searching around in the dark. We don't know where the thing is. We're driving through this boulder field, and it ripped one of the tracks off. It's 11 o'clock at night. We have no clue where it is. Things are getting bad.
And then we drove straight into a rock field. Because it was dark, we should have stopped, but instead, one of the tracks came off in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We didn't know where it had fallen off. We were just stuck at night, unable to communicate with a totally and absolutely wrecked machine.
The track fell off last night at about 11 at night at the bottom of this mountain over here. It's almost 400 meters away from where we are now. We're in a really bad situation. I don't know what the hell we're going to do.
It turned out it was a mile up the hill, 1 ton of track, a mile away. So for the next 24 hours, literally 24 hours, we rolled the track up, and the 4 of us, or 5 of us there, then hauled it and rolled it a mile back to the machine. There's nothing else to do. I don't know how none of us managed to kind of not get up. Hands completely broken as the ton was being wheeled back. And you can see the spikes.
2 tons of fun!
And then in the middle of nowhere, we tried to put the track on again. And it took 15 hours for us to be found. We were out of radio contact, but eventually the Russian helicopter, which was meant to be with us most of the time, found us. So that was the first disaster, but all credit to Bruce, who was the skipper of the Arctos. He did actually manage to get it so that it got the track back on. But dragging it for a mile without the track had done a lot of harm.
Right up under the bottom, you can almost stick your fingers up inside it. Got punctured by a huge sharp rock. All this stuff is ripped off. This thing's a mess.
I'm delighted there's proper equipment coming on board for radio contact, and then to literally make it so that we prepare ourselves for it to sink or stop wearing a survival kit.
And once again I allowed myself to think that it would be absolutely fine. We were about to do the things that no one had done before, and hey, you never did any of these things without some kind of disaster, and we just had one, two, third time lucky.
We've crossed, we just come off the shore coast, on the sea ice, and we go up north, we'll hit the point we want to take off with the Bering Straits, and we go across it, the Bering Straits right in front of us. If you go straight out that way, you're going to hit America. We're halfway there, just got to keep going. If the weather's like this, the machine's like this, we get the spare kits we need, we'll be on our way. But it's quite exciting, better than the last 2 days, so that's good news.
I was still absolutely optimistic as I could be. Jeff, who had actually already sailed the Northwest Passage, was less keen. He was getting really fed up with the machine. So he was dog paddling along to show how slow it was going to be going. And he was not convinced it was going to make it. But hey, optimism gets you through, and I was going to be as optimistic as possible. And then it stopped. And there was a scream of fire from the engine room.
We were in the front pod, and all of a sudden we heard screaming from Norm, and there was a fire in the engine room. They shut off the engine, fortunately really quickly. Smoke came billowing out, and we're stopped right here, balanced in between. We got out, and the arm that we're so worried about connecting the two vehicles together is cracked very badly at the back, and there's quite a controversy going on between our Russian people and the Arctos people, whether it should be welded here or taken further.
No, won't repair.
Yeah, here.
Sit down.
He just wants to go.
Yeah. Okay. Now.
But being in the Soviet Union, or Russia as it generally just was, is an extraordinary knowledge of what you can actually do. And it wasn't long before they'd put a complete welding machine in. They'd sent mechanics out from Labrentia into the middle of this nowhere, and we went back to Labrentia so that we could get some rest, whilst the Russian teams were brought in to sort it out and fix it up. Doc Ford was pretty convinced we'd never make it.
Just look at this place. We're only 2 kilometres out into the Bering Straits. This place looks like hell. These guys are absolutely knackered. They've been in that thing for 5 days, and Bruce still wants to go on. They're absolutely shattered. They cannot go any further. This is no joke, and I don't know how we're going to do it. You just look at those ice formations, and you look at that ridge out there, and you just think, this is no game. It's not a game for an airfix toy. No way.
And here we are at the very, very tip of the mainland of Siberia or Russia.
It's been a frustrating day. We got up at 4. We set out at 5. Turned right to go across straight to the Diomedes, and within 200 yards we were stuck and stopped, and we had to winch it out. We've been winching it out for 90 minutes. The ice is so thin for this vehicle, you can walk on it, and you can walk to the Diomedes today, but I don't know what we're going to do with this vehicle.
I think this machine is having a lot of difficulty handling these conditions, sinking, and Doc's just gone through the ice as well, so he's not best pleased. It's not looking very good at all. Very, very bad.
Could do tiny bits. And there we are, hiking to the coast, but out of where we needed to turn sharply to the east and head out towards America, which is only 26 miles away.
The ice conditions here are just too marginal for it, I think. It looks pretty insurmountable at this point. The ice this year is really thin. It's been a warm winter, and that was the one thing I've always wanted to avoid in this whole thing, is thin ice. you can will something to happen, and you can put your best efforts into it, and you throw all the sort of engineering efforts into it that you can have. But at some point, you have to say, that's it. And I think we're getting close to that point.
The ice conditions today are different from the ice conditions yesterday.
Yeah.
There's more open water, the ice is thinner. It's very different from other years.
Yeah.
But we have come, in the day we went to get across, less than 3 kilometres in more than 3 hours. And today is perfect. A breath of wind.
Gorgeous day.
And I think that today is a day when we could actually get across. So my view is that we ought to, of course, try for a little bit longer, because we always keep trying. But that by mid-afternoon we probably decide that we will, all of us, walk across the date line.
And I suppose this was the saddest part of my whole time on the dreaming about the project and doing it, knowing that we were not going to reach the summit. Having climbed, if you like, to the very, very top of the mountain, but not that final 100 yards.
It's got a big hole in the puncture on the bottom of the front compartment, which is leaking so much water when it's in the water that they can't pump it out with 2 bilge pumps. It's got 2 big slits in the back compartment and a slit at the back of the front. And now, very sadly, both Duncan and Bruce know it can't go any further. So it's tried hard. In fact, it's never been in conditions like it. It won't work. So I think this really is the end of the outhouse. So what we'll do now is go across in the helicopter, get on to the next bit of real land, and then drive all the way to New York, as we said we would, with a hole in the middle, which is just 50 miles. So it's very disappointing. But the truth is it can't get any further. And the truth is it's irresponsible. We gave it every shot we could. It's gone.
So the best we could do was to get helicoptered out from the mainland of Russia to an island right in the middle of the Bering Straits, only 28 miles away, nothing, called Big Diomede. And Big Diomede is less than a mile or 2 away from Little Diomede, which is the American island.
"12 minutes after 8 p.m. on the 17th, is it? Yeah, because 18th over there. Okay, 17th here.
So here it's the 18th.
You're in tomorrow.
I'm in tomorrow, and it's 5:15 in the afternoon, and it's the 18th, Friday the 18th of March.
Here, come on over and give yourself 21 hours.
Okay.
21 hours, right there. A whole new day.
Yeah.
I think we'll just forget about yesterday. Yeah.
And we walked from Russia into America. And there's a tiny village called Little Diomede, an American village with an American school and Pepsi Cola and hamburgers. And the next morning, we flew from a tiny ice strip which is only open for about 2 months a year. Usually you have to get by helicopter. We flew another 28 miles across the American side of the Bering Straits, looking down at what I was so convinced that we would have crossed.
It was good to walk across, and I'm really pleased we did that. Really, really pleased we did that. I look forward to seeing the team very shortly and get on with it. Look forward, not back. That's what we've been doing the whole time.
Hi. How are you?
And for the first time we had Western food. But the people who gave it to us, these great, great families, their relatives were exactly the same people who lived on the other side of the Bering Strait, Siberian Yupik.
It feels really good to be back as a team, isn't it?
I must admit, that's the best. I've been looking forward to that for ages.
As I've said to these guys from the week 2, all our team, that I think the best part of this whole journey is going to be Alaska.
Let's go! Let's go!
And the team were actually very, very excited. It was a real expedition. This was not having people drive them or tow them. This was people on own snow machines going across unknown territory.
We're on our way again at last, after 10 days in Nome. So I'm just looking forward to getting ahead and getting this bit done and getting to Fairbanks and then really being together with the mechanics as well.
And I've never spent so long on a snowmobile, and I will probably never spend so long again on a snowmobile. But it's good fun, good fun.
It's good to be in charge of your own route, really. Where you're going, you do what you want. Although I'm not so sure, being on the Skidoo with Marielle, I don't think I'm going to get to Fairbanks. We're doing our own bit.
Well, a lot of people say that week 13 is unlucky, and for me, week 13 was just one of the most depressing weeks in the entire trip. I had not the faintest idea why a snowmobile worked or how it did. I felt extremely fed up going along at sometimes 40, 50 miles an hour without any control whatever, in extremely cold times.
We're all acutely aware of the repercussions of not crossing the Bering Straits, but we feel very, very strongly that we've done something which is extraordinary and want to now continue to the very end and drive all the way to New York, and that's what we've been doing, and enormous support from London and here. And the Skidoo Trail looks fine and easy, but when you think we've got 8 days ahead of that, or maybe a few less, it's a very, very real problem, and we could have the kind of whiteout that we saw in Russia very easily. It's at the same geographical part of the world, so we're aware of that, and we'll keep pushing on to try and avoid it.
Up there, that's caribou migration. That whole path up there is footprints from caribou going up and over the ridge.
It's quite inspiring when you look at the hills you're driving through. You suddenly realise how tense you've been and how fed up you've been, and suddenly you move out into the mountains, and it feels really good.
Now we're on to a new challenge, and I think we're going to leave the frustrating days behind and travel through some awesome wilderness together, and with all the people we started from London with. So it's, I think it's the beginning of a great new segment of the journey on the way to New York.
I knew it was going to be one of the best parts of this trip, the sort of fun bit, and it's proving itself. It's absolutely marvellous. And the countryside is just unbelievable. It's, you know, just look around, it's just fantastic.
But looking back, hey, I can romanticise and say it was a great experience, and some of it was really great. Not a good thing to go 2 up in a snowmobile of that kind of length, but we hadn't got quite as much money as we ought to have by this stage, so we had to. And we kept stopping. Here we stopped at a place called Safety. This is just south of Nome, which is where the Iditarod race. It's the very last stop before they reach Nome from coming up from Fairbanks or Anchorage. And the Iditarod is the longest dog sledge race. And this guy was seen the very last person, waiting for the very last person to come through. So we waited for this person to come in, and she did, and she was covered in frostbite. She'd been completely and absolutely stuck. And her dogs were, well, they had lots of cuts and bruises. And she was extraordinarily brave.
Yeah, those 2 dogs are back there. Carol must be back there. Hi.
It's great, isn't it? I was at this place when the first bloke came in, and I'm at this place when the last lady's come in. That's, how many days later is that? How many days later is it? 10 days. About 10 days later. And she's got her own fan club, us now, because we can't go anywhere, so we're looking after her.
Wind increasing to 20 knots. Outward northeast winds, 20 knots.
And the storm cleared and we set off, going off towards Fairbanks. Hours and hours, days and days of just snowmobiling. Actually, if I knew how a snowmobile worked, and I had crossed the Bering Straits, it would have been the most exciting journey one could ever have done. I was looking forward to it hugely. We eventually got to the tree line. These are the first trees we'd seen for about 6 weeks. Cooltag would just come over the Kayak Mountain Pass and had done 24 hours absolutely non-stop sitting in the saddle of snow machines.
Waffles, potatoes, bacon, eggs, toast, coffee.
How does it taste?
Heaven. It's better than pizzas out of the Skidoo engine.
Well, I'm a little tired, like the rest of these piggy-eyed people around me. But I think yesterday was the absolute best day of all. Because we had a bit of adventure, a bit of endurance, a few laughs, and we didn't go to bed all night, so it felt like a real expedition.
It doesn't really matter. It will take us a lot of time anyhow, 140 or 95.
But it wasn't going to be all easy, in the same way as we had problems over in Siberia, so we suddenly found that now it really was starting to thaw. And we were going through pretty mushy snow on the rivers, which only 2 weeks earlier had been easy to go through. And we realised that if we didn't get all the way there, we'd be getting into a time when the river was thawing too much for us to go over it. And then we really would have lost. If we hadn't crossed the Bering Straits, which we hadn't, and we hadn't been able to do the snowmobile, what kind of expedition was it? And Art Mortford, who was our Alaskan leader, suddenly found that he went in. So we spent 1.5 days in Ruby, cleaning everything up, drying it all off, and debating how on earth we were going to go forward. And then we found two extraordinary helpers, Tom and Larry, and they came up 125 miles in just under 5 hours, and we took 3-4 times as long as that for another 15 to 20 hour day to go from Ruby all the way down to Manly Hot Spring.
Though the best thing is it's a brilliant day. We can see what we've been missing on the Yukon, and hell, even if they say from Tanana to Manly is 65 miles of motorway, I'll believe that when I see it, but we couldn't go home without trying, could we?
Once again I was stuck at the back, and that meant that whilst they were all having their lunches and tea breaks and coffee breaks, I was desperately trying to keep up with them, and then didn't get much tea, lunch or coffee break.
Hey, this is the most brilliant day. I was even more elated until I came off 30 seconds ago, but so I thought I was rather good at skidooing, but I've backtracked a bit, but best day ever, eh, gang? What do you think? Yeah? Absolutely, it's like having your own roller coaster and being in charge of it.
We're almost there. Just around the bend.
No, you said that the last time. You said, just round the next corner. Oh, great.
I want to keep your spirits.
Yeah, there's no more water when we're round the next bend. We've been around 5 bends and we've been through another 3 sets of water. Larry, you're lying to us.
And there was General Viktor Karputkin, a general of the Soviet times, snowmobiling through Alaska. It was an extraordinary achievement. We really were a United Nations project, and you felt it as we were coming to the end of this journey. Because once we got here, it was, well, we thought, plain sailing. And we were getting pretty close to the end of the winter season. And I knew this was the last but one day before we'd never be able to do it. No one did do it, including Tom, who was leading us through. And then suddenly it's roads. We're in the cars. We actually were back in the Ford Mondeos and the Mavericks, which had taken us all the way across Russia. And some had new motors and some had been completely done up. So somehow or other, we had to get to New York in 4 days for a journey which should take 10. So we created beds in the back of the car and went on.
And I've pulled enough dead people out of cars in my time to know what it's like. So don't talk to me about safety, all right? That's enough. He's petrified and he knows enough about bloody rally driving, okay? I don't care where you f***ing learnt to drive.
I don't want to get personal into who's doing well and who's doing badly, but I've been sitting at the back and I've been watching, and it's not a good start. Okay. So I'd like you all to believe that there's a car on every single bend. Not there isn't, because if you don't believe that, you're in real trouble. But let's be very, very, very cautious. Okay, let's go again.
I just tried to pass them because they said the road is clear, so I assumed the road is clear, so I moved to a pass and I tried, the Munia didn't have a radio, I tried to signal her to go aside, and I got a little close. I was in control all the time, I knew what happens.
Don't worry, you're with me now. I'll look after you.
I think I need some rehabilitation.
Okay, I'm going to I hope to pass my test next year.
Darn it, we're only laughing, mate, I tell her.
Oh, my L plate's falling off.
We're about 500 miles out of Edmonton, 2,500 miles from Fairbanks, and 2,500 miles from New York. We're about 1,600 miles from Toronto, which is where we're trying to get to for this presumed stopover where we can actually go to bed. When I was at school, I always wanted to drive across America, but I was going to do it. I thought about doing it in 6 weeks, not 4 days.
So from here on, we just drove all the way across Canada. And it was just a feeling of towns coming, towns going. We stopped for petrol every 5 or 6 hours. We ate a little bit, but not much. We slept in the cars and kept on going. It feels like just one day, not the 4 it was. Just non-stop driving to see if we could make it. And, hey, there was Victor Pupkin stopping at McDonald's and having hamburgers and milkshakes. And the road got clearer and clearer, and it became more and more civilized. And suddenly the sunsets that I'd recognized on previous journeys across America were looking as they always had. And I'm almost forgetting the fact we've been on one of the most extraordinary expeditions, the most extraordinary drive that's ever happened. And it just was relentless. Day and night, day and night, day and night. And every now and again we'd stop at a monument. This is a monument of a person, a one-legged person, because he'd lost another leg with cancer, who'd walked across Canada.
And he wanted to raise money because he had cancer in his right leg, and his right leg was taken off. And by the time he got to Canada, or to Ontario, he'd run 2 or almost 3,000 miles, and the nation was just captivated by the courage and the spirit. And millions of dollars started flowing for cancer research. But I think we've shown a lot of courage in our journey across the world, and I thought we'd stop here to see a Canadian example. And now we got to get back in the car.
2 minutes, stop.
See you, Terry. Nice to meet you.
We've done 3,930 miles now. And we're nearly there.
I haven't broken the speed limit more.
I'm not breaking it now. Going to break it a bit more.
And then suddenly we were in Toronto, a big city. It effectively would reach the end of the journey. Lots of friends I'd known from old who lived in Toronto were here. And this extraordinary journey was effectively at an end. Not quite, as I'd find out later on. The drive from Toronto to New York is about 10 hours, and 3 or 4 hours in when you leave Canada, you get to the Niagara Falls. So it was crazy not to go and have a look at it. I, in fact, by this time was in New York, but the team went there.
Niagara-on-the-Lake, I think, is the town, and Jeff has advised us this is the most scenic way to get round, so we'll see. Should be good, though. Get some lovely pictures. It's the first time for me at Niagara Falls.
Видишь, я почему взял это Британия.
Тебя хочет фотографировать здесь. Или там.
С полом. Да?
It's absolutely fantastic to be here, just to hear the sounds of the water and to see it. I didn't expect it to be I expected it to be out in the middle of nowhere, but it's fantastic that we can get so close, and the journey up here was beautiful. It's so nice to get off highways.
And as we came to New York, it was like going full circle. We suddenly found that we had a police escort all the way through Manhattan. Motorcycle outriders, police cars stopping up the traffic to take us through.
We finally made it. It's incredible. It's so great to be here. It's indescribable. It's the Monday I left in London from, and now I've got Dieter bringing it on home. Marielle here.
Marielle.
It's time to go party. It's time to go dancing.
It's great, the car driving to New York, and I'm very excited. Oh, yes!
We had a helicopter team over the front so they could see us. And suddenly there was United Nations. And it was a kind of about to become an anticlimax. I mean, it is at the end of these journeys. You've got there, and all you want to do now is get back home and see your families.
Мы наконец-то приехали в Нью-Йорк.
Oh, yes, the end.
And Victor, right there, extraordinary. All this was being done live for a television programme, and suddenly, instead of going all the way to England to see a family, they were actually in the United Nations building, brought in by the ITV television station.
It's got the Overland channel on the front and your UNA UK on the back, and inside it are messages from political leaders from most of the countries through which we've travelled. And it's a real pleasure to let go of it and to give it to you, the United Nations here in New York, all the way from London.
Thank you. I declare the Overland Challenge officially and successfully complete. Thank you.